So yeah, a little bit overview of workshop. You guys are always welcome to talk, interrupt me if you can. If you have any questions, type in the chat. If you guys have any questions, I will periodically check the chat. If I forget and haven't checked in a while, of course, you can remind me and I'll go back and answer any questions. You guys can just speak up and we can make this really engaging and so it's back and forth with one another. And of course, last reminder, you guys have your lecture 3 exam next Thursday, which is like in 6 days. So you guys make sure you're prepared for that. Okay, so we'll begin with the first topic right now. Actually, no. We'll start with the polling question. This is an icebreaker poll to get you guys used to the polling, so there won't be any issues when we start going to other questions. So just I will send the poll out now. The question is with over a full year of online classes almost done, how much have you enjoyed it? Because we've been in lockdown for quite some time. I just gonna see what you guys' thoughts are on it. So I launched the polls right now. I'll give you guys a little bit to answer it. All right, looks like, yeah, a lot of you guys went with B. Most of you guys went with B, and I would say that too. This lockdown has been pretty hard, and online classes are not the best and most ideal, but we have next semester to look forward to. Going back to school will be really exciting, so I can't wait for that. And I would agree with you guys also, B would be my answer. I didn't really like it as much as in person, but we'll move on. All right, so first topic is about your blood and all the circulation that goes around your body. So what is the function of blood? What does it do? First, it transports gases, nutrients, waste, hormones, and cells. Gases such as carbon dioxide and oxygen, which you breathe and expire. Nutrients such as glucose, all the stuff that provides the energy to your tissues. It gets moved along in the blood to other tissues and other organs in order to provide them nutrients. Waste, if you guys didn't know, pee actually comes from your blood. Your blood is filtrated through your kidneys, and that's where your pee comes from. So there's waste inside your blood that gets moved out and it comes out as you pee. Hormones, a lot of hormones like insulin, cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, they all transport. That's how they move to all over your body. It's through the bloodstream. It transports it all over. And of course, you guys know about the cells in your blood, your red blood cells and your white blood cells. They also are moved along throughout your blood. All right, and it also protects against blood loss and toxins, bacteria, and viruses. So when I talk about protect against blood loss, if you get a cut and you're bleeding, components in your blood, the platelets in your blood are there to block the cuts and to stop the bleeding. It acts as like all your scabs. After if you get a cut on your arm, after a while you get a scab. That's all your platelets from your bloods forming that scab to cover it up and protect yourself and your skin from all the other stuff such as the toxins, bacteria that can enter your body. And if they do, that's where you also have your white blood cells there to protect against those toxins. And it also regulates water levels, pH levels, and temperature. Like I said before, your urine comes from your blood, and the more water you drink determines how much of that water is also taken out of your blood and put into the pee. Or if your water levels are low, then your blood regulates that it keeps more of that water in order to keep the water inside your body. Also, pH levels. Blood has a typical pH level of slightly over basic, like a 7.3, 7.4. And we know pH level basics, a neutral pH level is 7. So it's slightly over neutral, around 7.3, 7.4. So it needs to stay in that range in order for yourself to be healthy. And finally, your temperature. It regulates temperature through which we'll talk about later, also by your blood vessels can constrict and dilate, and based on how cold it is outside. Let's say if it's cold outside, your blood vessels will want to constrict around the surface of your skin and around like your fingers and all these other organs and skeletal areas that don't need it as much compared to like your innards, your visceral organs. So like your heart, your lungs, your liver, those that's where the blood goes back into to conserve that proper temperature within your body. So there you can see that the blood regulates the temperature based on how cold your surroundings are. All right. So a little bit more about blood is what does it what does blood consist of? 55%, a little bit over half, is plasma, which is clear extracellular fluid. It has a bunch of things like your waste, like particles. It's mostly water though. Around 70% of the plasma is water, so that's where all your water is in your blood. There are also your erythrocytes, which take up about 45% of your blood, and those are just all your red blood cells that we will talk about later as well. And lastly, a little bit less than 1% is your Buffy coat, which consists of your leukocytes and platelets. And as we can see in this image, you have your blood plasma, which is a little bit over half, and the Buffy coat and red blood cells fall into another category called formed elements, because those are like the actual cells in there. So the Buffy coat and red blood cells are under the formed elements category as well. So we could talk a little bit about your erythrocytes, the red blood cells. These are what allow your body to transport all the carbon dioxide and oxygen throughout your body to all your different muscles and tissues. It allows your body to get energy so it can start producing, so you can start moving and stuff and do your daily tasks. A great way to identify it, which is very different than all the other cells, is it has this discoid shape or biconcave shape, which is, it's basically like a disc, and biconcave means both sides of them concave inward. So it's really easy to identify a red blood cell based on their shape, their discoid shape, the circular shape that they have. There is also no nucleus, mitochondria, and they're missing other organelles that other cells would have. A big way to identify them, if you're talking about the features, is that a red blood cell has no nucleus. It's the only cell that has no nucleus in your body. So that's a key feature when it comes to red blood cells. They also have a lifespan about only 120 days. So they're constantly getting recycled throughout your body as you're living. They constantly, they get born and then they die over and over again in order for your body to keep its energy up. And now an important feature about all the blood cells, because this is important to know the blood types when it comes to blood transfusions, because does anybody know what would happen if someone, let's say with type A blood, would get type B blood, or a blood that does not belong in their body? Do you know what would happen inside the blood vessels? Feel free to type in the chat or just say it out loud. All right, so in a way, yeah, your body does reject it, and that rejection is called agulation. That's when your blood starts clotting, and that's the last thing you want in your blood vessels, because if your blood starts clotting, then blood cannot pass through it. You have high blood pressure, which is not good, and it could result in things like stroke or a heart attack. So that's the very important things when it comes to blood transfusions, to know which type of blood corresponds with which other type of blood. So what I mean by that is that we'll talk about the blood types and which one matches with which. So for all your red blood cells, they have these antigens on the surface of them that are essentially, they're like markers. They are used to identify what type of blood cells. Type A blood cells, red blood cells, have a type A antigen, as you guys can see. Type B has their B antigen. AB has both the A and B antigens, and type O has none of them. Now in the plasma, you have these antibodies, which essentially just if they identify like a foreign substance, it will start attacking that foreign substance. That's what your antibody does. It's there to protect you. It starts attacking that foreign substance inside your body that isn't supposed to be there. So like with a type A blood, if you put type B blood, because when you do a blood transfusion, science is good enough where you could only put in like red blood cells, transfuse red blood cells, or only transfuse plasma, or only transfuse white blood cells. So if somebody with type A blood is given type B blood, only the red blood cells, all those type B blood, red blood cells have this B antigen on them, which will result in the plasma in the person getting the transfusion. All of their anti-B antibodies in their plasma are going to start attacking that new type B blood that is put into their body. And when it starts attacking that red blood cell, the type B red blood cell, it'll start to cause coagulation and start to cause clotting within your arteries and veins, and that's not what you want. So when it comes to like a red blood cell, like the type AB ones, which do not have any antibodies, that means that they can receive any type of blood because they do not have antibodies that are going to start attacking that new blood. Nothing inside their blood system is going to start attacking a foreign substance. But with something like type O, they have both the anti-A and anti-B bodies. So all of type A, type B, and type AB, they both have those antigens on those on their blood cells. They have the markers there. So when the type O plasma with both those antibodies see any of the type A, type B, or type AB bloods with the antigens on them, they're going to start attacking it. So that's why you always want to make sure that you're putting the right blood with with the correct type. So now, can anybody tell me which blood type is known to be the universal recipient? Which blood type can receive any type of blood, no issue? The universal recipient will actually be type AB, and reason is because in their plasma they have no antibodies. So in their plasma, there's nothing that will attack any new foreign blood. So if a person with type AB gets a type A, nothing in the type AB person will start attacking the new type A blood that comes in. If you guys have a question. Yes, you're correct. The universe, because type O has no antigens on them, they are known as a universal donor. Because if you give someone a type O blood, that type O blood has no antigens on it. It has no markers on the blood. So the plasma in the person that is receiving the blood is not going to start attacking the type O blood because they have no markers that will show the antibodies to start attacking them, which is why they are considered the universal donor. And type AB blood, who has no antibodies, nothing that will attack anything, they are the recipient because they can receive anything and nothing in their body will start attacking what they just received. So moving on, we're going to talk about the Buffy coat. Remember, it consists of your thrombocytes, which is another word for platelets, which are small cell fragments of megakaryocytes. Megakaryocytes are these large cells that come from your bone marrow. So that's where the cell fragment comes from. The megakaryocyte, it breaks down, and so little fragments become your platelets. And they form blood clots to prevent bleeding. And this is essential because if you have a cut somewhere, you don't want your body to keep bleeding and bleeding because you're going to start losing too much blood. So that's where these platelets are there. If they are properly working, they should be coming in and stopping that, stopping the cut, stopping the bleeding to help you survive. There are also leukocytes, which are known as your white blood cells. They protect against pathogens. So any foreign virus, bacteria that enters into your body, even if it's not in your bloodstream, the leukocytes will go after them and go kill and destroy these foreign toxins in order to protect yourself. Like I said, they can move out of the bloodstream into your connective tissue. Let's say you have somewhere outside the bloodstream that is infected, your body will respond and send leukocytes to that area in order to protect yourself. And about the leukocytes, there are two types, the granulocytes and agranulocytes, which we will now talk about. Granulocytes means they're grainy. If you look at them, granulocytes are more grainy, and agranulocytes are not grainy at all. So that's the difference between them. So now, can anybody list what the granulocytes of the white blood cells are? What the names of those white blood cells are? So those granulocytes are, oh no, not your leukocytes, yes, are your white blood cells, and the type of leukocytes are the granulocytes and the agranulocytes. And within that subcategory of leukocytes, the type of granulocytes, there are your neutrophils, your eosinophils, and your basophils, which are all different types of white blood cells who have this grainy feature that identifies them as a granulocyte. Can anybody name the other two agranulocytes, white blood cell types that there are? The ones that fall under the agranulocytes category? Yes, nice. That's correct. These are your lymphocytes and your monocytes. And a really easy way to identify what the difference is between these five white blood cells is in your granulocytes, all the neutrophils, the eosinophils, and basophils, they end with "phil." So if you can memorize that, these ones that end with "phils" are under the granulocytes category, and the lymphocytes and monocytes, which end in "cyte," are the agranulocytes. So that's how I use to remember it, and that's a helpful tip for you guys to remember which white blood cell falls under which category. Now, also in this image on the right side, we have your erythrocytes, which are your red blood cells, and also your thrombocytes. Now, what I want to do is to get everybody, we can start identifying what the images are. This is kind of like part of your lab portions where you'll get the images and you have to identify what type of blood cells there are. So can anybody point out which type is you guys can talk or type in chat, which of the white blood cells are the neutrophils from this image? So I'll give you a hint. For the neutrophils, it is this white blood cell that is identified by having these three. This is the nucleus. This purple part's the nucleus. So the nucleus has like this feature of like three different lobes almost. They look almost like different kidney beans. So the neutrophils, the way to identify them is that they have their nucleus have these three different lobes, and if you can also see that they have a grainy feature on them, you can see the little dots. That's where they get the name granulocytes, because they have the grainy feature within them. Now for the eosinophils, it is this it also has the grainy features, as you can see. It has all these little dots over the nucleus on the surface. But the difference between the eosinophils and neutrophils is that the nucleus only has 2 lobes. So that's what you can use to identify between the neutrophil and the eosinophils. It's 2 lobes or 3 lobes of the nucleus. Now for your basophils, it also has this granular feature. As you can see, you can't see the nucleus. All those little dots are not, it's not the nucleus. There's so many grains on them that you can't see the nucleus. So the way to identify the basophil is, it's just, you can't see the nucleus because it's covered up so much by all the grains and little circles that you see on the surface on them. Now for your lymphocytes, it is the way to identify them, as you can see, is that there are no granular features, none of the little dots that you see on the other white blood cells. And the way to identify them is that their nucleus takes up a lot of their surface area. If you see in the cell, this nucleus is almost as big as the white blood cell itself. So when you want to look and identify a lymphocyte, you look for the one with the biggest nucleus that's taken up the most space and that does not have any granular features on them. It's more clear than the other ones. And the last type of white blood cells are your monocytes. They also do not have any of the grainy features, but the difference is that their nucleus is more of like a horseshoe shape. You could really see the indent that's in the middle of the nucleus. It's more like a horseshoe shape, and it takes up a lot of the monocyte cell, but also not as much as how much the nucleus of the lymphocyte takes up. So that's the difference. Remember, lymphocytes takes up most of the cell, but the monocyte has that horseshoe shape that differentiates it from the lymphocytes. And of course, your erythrocytes are your white or your red blood cells. It has that disc shape and the biconcave. You can see in the middle, there's an indent. It goes down on both sides, on the top and the bottom of the white blood cell. So it has that biconcave shape and that very circular shape that identifies it from the other ones. And lastly, you guys can see those little small cell fragments, like there's three in a pair or 2 in a pair, and just like these little small cell fragments that are your thrombocytes, your platelets. These, remember, are what's responsible to prevent blood loss, to clot all the cuts that you get. So now we'll have a second polling question. What are the functions of blood? I will send the poll out right now. Nice. Yeah, you guys all got it correct. It is transport, protect, regulate. Though that's the big three big things about blood. You want to remember: transport, protect, and regulate. Those are the blood functions. So now we'll talk about the blood vessels. What's holding all this blood inside your body? First, we have your arteries, which are efferent vessels carrying blood away from the heart. And there are also your veins, which are afferent vessels carrying blood towards your heart. Now, this is the big differentiating factor that you use to identify what's an artery and what's a vein. Ways to remember this is here's some of the things I did. You can remember that arteries are efferent. Efferent can also be a word like exiting. It's exiting your heart. It's going away from it. And veins are afferent. It's arriving to your heart. It's coming to. Another way also, you can see arteries go away. Arteries starts with an A, away starts with an A. That's also how I remembered it. So if arteries go away from your heart, then veins would be the ones going towards your heart because that's the only other option. So those are just like simple ways that you can use the words and their definitions to identify, remember what they mean and what that organ does and stuff. And also there are your capillaries. So you're part of your blood vessels, which are microscopic vessels that form a network between arterioles and venules. And the arterioles and venules, they're basically another word for like really small arteries and veins. So leading up to the capillaries are your arterioles, and exiting past your capillaries are your venules, which eventually will lead to like your vein, and your arteries lead to arterioles. So they're just another word for like really small arteries and veins, which lead up and are after the capillaries. So we can talk a little bit about the layers of your blood vessels. There's the tunica interna, which is the inner layer. Interna and inner are really easy ways for you to identify that this is the inner layer, the one most on the inside. It is made up of a simple squamous endothelium. It is also very slick because you want the blood to be flowing smoothly and without much friction throughout your blood vessels so it can move all over your body. That's why this inner layer is also very slick to allow for the good movement. Your tunica media, which is the middle layer, middle media, easy way to remember it. This is responsible for vasoconstriction and vasodilation, which I talked about before, how your blood regulates your body temperature by constricting or dilating your blood vessels in different parts of your body, depending on the temperature and stuff. It is also very important when you start doing activities. For instance, if you're exercising, all your blood vessels that are near your skeletal muscles and lead up to your skeletal muscles, those dilate in order to provide more blood to your skeletal muscles. Because if you're exercising, you need all that energy, you need all the oxygen from your blood to allow you to keep going and keep exercising. And in other places, such as your kidneys or your liver, those arteries and veins, they constrict because when you're exercising, you're not really thinking about like going to the bathroom or anything. So places like your bladder, those vessels constrict and less blood and resources are put into those areas, so they'll be transferred to your skeletal muscles in order for you to get the most energy from it. There's also the tunica externa layer, which is your outside layer, the external. And those anchor the vessels to your surroundings because you don't want your blood vessels to start moving all over your body. You want them to stay in the relative areas that they are. So they anchor the vessels to the surroundings, such as like the tissues that are around your veins. And we can see here in this image that there's the tunica interna, that first blue layer, and part of the endothelium. That's the very middle layer of the vessels. And then there's the tunica media, which is the right in the middle between that and the tunica externa. And one thing about this medium vein, which is just like a regular vein, because as we know, you have bigger veins, which is like your superior inferior vena cava, so is your heart, and you have the smaller veins, which are like all the veins that run to your fingers and your toes. So this is just a regular medium vein, an average vein. But the thing is about veins is that they have this valve, and only veins have this valve. Your arteries do not have this, and the reason is because arteries are like directly exiting your heart. So all the pressure from your heart pumping the blood is pushing all the blood easily through your arteries. So there's no need for a valve to be there to help the blood movement. But when it comes to your veins, there's not as much pressure because they're further away from your heart. The blood circulation takes a much longer time to get to your veins than it does to your arteries when it comes from your heart. So the pressure in your veins are a little bit less, and that's when the valves come in. They're there so that you don't have any backflow of your blood. You don't want your blood going in the wrong direction. So that's where the valves come in, and they only open in one direction in order to let the blood flow, and to prevent any backflow, they close so your blood does not go in the wrong direction. And remember, only your veins have this because they have less pressure compared to the arteries to move the blood around. Now for your capillaries, their role is to transport nutrients, waste, and hormones. Remember I talked about this, like the waste that comes from your pee, your hormones that travel throughout your body, and the nutrients. The thing with capillaries is that they exchange between the blood and the tissue cells, meaning they are the one providing the energy within all your tissues and everything, and transporting the hormones to your tissues and all the gases between them in order for you to get the energy. So this is all happening in your capillaries. They also have precapillary sphincters that open and close. And when they close, the blood flows through the meta-arterial and through the thoroughfare channel. And going back, so an example of when the capillaries would close is, remember how I was talking about your vasoconstriction and dilation? For instance, if you're exercising, the capillaries within other areas that are not your skeletal muscles, those don't need the transport of all these nutrients and gases as much as your skeletal muscles would. So like your vessels and capillaries, let's say in like your bladder while you're exercising, those don't need all the intricate transfers that goes on throughout your capillary beds. So instead, it will just go through the simple meta-arterial channel, meta-arterial and the thoroughfare channel. It'll just go straight through that and not along all your capillary beds, because more blood is being put to your skeletal muscles, and not like, let's say, your bladder when you're exercising. So they don't need this intricate capillary bed to transport all the oxygen and the nutrients to your organs. So this is just like an image, a little chart to show you how much blood is in which part of your body. A lot of it is in your veins, and the reason why your veins has more is because their walls are thinner and less rigid than arteries. And this goes back to before. Remember how I told you your arteries they don't have the valves because they have more pressure from the heart pushing the blood through. So because of all that pressure, your artery walls, they need to be thicker, they need to be stronger in order to handle all that pressure and not break. So the fact that they're thicker and more rigid means that there's less blood that can be held within them. While the veins are more thin, they have more space for more blood to be within them, which is why veins have most of the blood in your body. So we have another polling question. This is a true or false one. The tunica interna is responsible for the constriction and dilating of the blood vessels. I will launch the poll right now. Yeah, you guys mostly got it correct. It is false. Does anybody know why? Does anybody know why it is incorrect, and which layer is responsible for constricting and dilating? Yes, you're correct. The tunica media. That's the one that constricts and dilates. And the tunica interna is the one that has the simple squamous endothelium, which is slick because it's the very inner layer. It provides the slickness in order for the blood to be easily moved throughout your body without any friction. So now we can talk a little bit more about your heart, which is a contracting pump of variable rate and strength, which means your pump your heart is literally like it's contracting. It's like a muscle. It pumps the blood throughout your body by contracting and dilating and contracting and dilating over and over again. And at variable rate and strength depends on how much you need at that moment. Like let's say if you just all of a sudden start sprinting, your heart needs to start pumping like much faster at a stronger rate in order to deliver more oxygen and more blood to the rest of your body. So depending on what you're doing and what how well in shape you are, how your cardiovascular is depends or will determine the rate and strength of your heart contracting and pumping all the blood throughout your body. So it consists of involuntary striated cardiac muscle. Involuntary meaning you're not controlling what your heart pumping, so it's doing it on your own. And striated, where if you see it in an image, it has like striations, these lines that go throughout the microscopic image of your cardiac muscles that is used to identify the difference between like other muscles and stuff. So it is involuntary and striated. Those are two key features that you need to remember about the cardiac muscle. And your heart consists of your aortas, your vena cavas, your superior and inferior ones, the left and right atriums, as well as your left and right ventricles, and all four of the valves that are in it, which we will talk about now. As you see in this image, the first thing you want to remember is that the red and blue vessels, they do not mean veins and blood. I mean veins and arteries. The red and blue means oxygenated blood for the red vessels and deoxygenated blood, the ones without oxygen within the blue. So it's easy to get mixed up to thinking blue is veins, red is arteries, but you got to think of it as which vessels has blood in them. So we can start off. You have your aorta, which is this big vessel that goes through the top of your heart. This is what pushes all the blood out to the rest of your body. This is the very end of the circulation, which we'll also talk about later, but the aorta is responsible for bringing the blood out into the rest of your body so that the rest of your organs and muscles can get all the blood and oxygen. You also have your superior and inferior vena cavas. These are the biggest veins that you have. This is where blood enters into your heart. After it is getting circulated throughout your body, it comes to the top and bottom of the vena cavas, and it enters your heart where it starts the heart circulation. And it enters in through or enters into your right atrium. Your right atrium, you have a right and left one, which are above your right and left ventricles. So your right and left atriums, they also contract in order to pump blood through these valves that you can see right here, which you have four of. Your right AV valve, you have your left AV valve, which means AV is atrioventricular, which is atrium and ventricles combined. So it is the valve that's between your atrium and ventricles, so your atrioventricular valve. So you have the right one and your left one. And the other valves you have are your pulmonary and aortic valves, which are from your ventricles. Your ventricles pump through the pulmonary and aortic valves, while your atrium pumps through the right and left AV valves. So for the right and left ventricles, they are the ones contracting the most and pumping the most because they pump out to your other to like your lungs and the rest of your body, compared to the atrium, which only pumps to another part of your heart. So the right and left ventricles, they have muscles like the trabecular carne. You have your myocardium, which is the middle layer of your heart, and those are responsible for really contracting your heart and making sure the blood is pumped strongly through to the rest of your bodies. And for your valves open and close in order to prevent backflow, like the one in your veins. You don't want blood going back in the opposite direction that it should be going. So when blood is pumped through the valves, those valves close. And for your right and left AV valves, they have these tendinous cords and the papillary muscles that's connected to these valves, and that helps the valves open and close, and it helps the circulation and the contractions of your heart. While on your pulmonary valves and your aortic valves, they also have other muscles within them, but not as much as like the tendinous cords and your other papillary muscles to help them out. So other features about the heart, you have your two septums, the interatrial septum and your interventricular septum. This is easy to identify. Interatrial means it separates, it's in between the atriums, the two atriums. So it's this higher one, right where the atriums are. And your interventricles are between your ventricles. It is between the right and left one. It's what separates them. So those are easy ways to identify which is which. Your fossa ovalis, which is right here in the right atrium, is just it's remnants of like a valve or a flap that used to be there when you were in the womb, and once you're born, that is like instantly, once your heart starts pumping, that is instantly destroyed and not used anymore. And the fossa ovalis is just like the leftover remnant of it. So we could now talk about the circulation of your heart, which you have the pulmonary circulation and the systematic circulation. And the difference between this is in a pulmonary circuit, the blood is flowing from your right heart, the right side of your heart, to your lungs. Pulmonary refers to the lungs, so that circulation is only within your lungs and part of your heart. So that's how you remember it, and that's where CO2 is unloaded, so you can expire and breathe out the CO2, and oxygen is loaded. It's loaded into the blood so that it can be pumped back into the rest of your body. And for the systemic circuit, that's where blood flows from the left heart to the rest of your body. And that's where oxygen is unloaded and CO2 is loaded, so that in the rest of your body, the oxygen is unloaded into your cells and your tissues to provide them energy. And all the used up oxygen that becomes CO2 is loaded into the blood circulations from your muscles and organs, so that it can be pumped out back to your heart and then expired as it goes through the pulmonary circulation. So this is constantly going from your heart, from your lungs and hearts to the rest of your body, where oxygen and CO2 is just being unloaded and loaded over and over again. So now here's the blood flow. There are about 11 steps that goes through the blood flow circuit. So as I mentioned before, veins, they bring the blood back to the heart. So when blood enters the heart, that's when it starts. That's the beginning of the circuit. So you can see in the vena cavas, they can be like the last step, but also the first step. This is where the blood comes into the heart, into the right atrium. That's when the circulation starts. So your right atrium is the very first place that the blood circulation starts. And as the right atrium contracts, it pushes the blood down past the right AV valve, which you also want to remember, at every single valve that it crosses, that's another step. So you want to make sure that you include that you don't just skip over like the valves, the crossing over the valves and the closing of them. So the second step is that it passes the AV valve, and the AV valve closes after the blood passes through, and it passes to the third step, which is the left ventricle, this whole area right here. And as that passes through, it passes through the from the left ventricle, the blood flows through past the pulmonary valve, this valve right here that leads to the pulmonary trunk. So remember that also passes through a second valve as it leaves the left ventricle. And as it goes into the pulmonary trunk, it starts the pulmonary circulation, where it goes to your lungs. So the blood exits your heart through your left and right pulmonary arteries. Remember, arteries go out of your heart, so it's going away from your heart. So they are arteries, and it's going towards your lungs. So it goes out the left and right side, and as it goes through your lungs and it circulates through your lungs and it comes back to your heart is where the sixth step comes in, where it enters through the veins. And you guys can see where it exits. That's where all the blue vessels are because there's no oxygen in it. But after it comes back from your lungs and gets that oxygen, it comes back through the left and right veins, and those vessels are red because they are full with oxygen. They're oxygenated right after coming back from your lungs. So from the left and right pulmonary veins, it enters the left atrium. So from the left atrium, it flows down the left AV valves. It crosses the second AV valve into your left ventricle. So it's kind of easy to remember that the right atrium goes to the right, through the right AV valves to the right ventricles. It's on the right side. And then the left atrium goes through the left AV valve to the left ventricle. It's all on the left side. So you kind of identify, okay, this is the right side is the first step, and then the second step is on the left side. So after entering your left ventricle, the blood is the ventricle contracts, and then it pushes that blood through your fourth and last valve, the aortic valve. The aortic valve leads up to the aorta. That's why aortic valve leads to aorta. So it leaves your left ventricles, it gets pumped into the aorta, where it eventually leaves the aorta and goes onto the rest of your arteries, to the rest of your body, where all your tissues and your organs use that blood, and then it comes back to the last step through the inferior and superior vena cavas, where it flows to the right atrium, and it starts the cycle all over again, where it goes through the valves, through the pulmonary trunk to your lungs, to your left atrium, through that valve to the left ventricle, and then out to the aorta, to the rest of your body, and then back over and over and over again constantly. Now, a little bit about what causes this circulation. What moves all your blood is the contracting, but how does your heart contract? What's responsible for that contracting? And that is your sinoatrial or SA node, which is can also be seen as the pacemaker of your heart. And if you guys have heard like medical things where somebody's sinoatrial node is not working properly, they have their own pacemaker that sets the pace for their heart pumping if the natural one in their body is not working. So it's what makes your heart contract, and it does this, or it's located in the right atrium. It's a small group of cardiac muscle cells. A node is just like a small group of cells all compact together. So it is in the right atrium of the heart. You have to remember it, the right atrium. And it starts contracting by sending electrical signals that spread throughout the heart. So there are electrical signals that are going on constantly in your body, but they're very small, so that they're not affecting you or damaging you. But there's still electrical signals that can be identified, but they are what is causing the contraction and everything that is happening inside your heart. There's also the atrioventricular node, which is close between the atrium and the ventricles, and then the atrioventricular bundle and the Purkinje fibers. And we'll look at all of those right now. So the conduction of electricity through your heart has its own circulation, and it starts at the first place at the SA node, your pacemaker. So when your SA node gives out an electrical signal, that electrical signal spreads out all over your heart, first to your right and left ventricles. I mean, not your right and left atriums at the top here. So when the left and right atriums, they're filled with this electricity and excitation, they contract. And when that contracts, that pushes the blood out of the atriums. And when the electrical signals reach the atrioventricular node, which is close to the AV valves and like the next ventricle, that gets excited, and then that sends this electricity down the atrioventricular bundle, also known as the bundle of His. So it goes down that bundle and it splits to the right and left branches, bundle branches, so that it can go now from your atriums, the electricity will split and then start spreading around the rest of your heart to all the other ventricles. So you can see that where the Purkinje fibers they start, that's where the electricity is spreading throughout your ventricles, and eventually the electricity towards the end of your the Purkinje fibers, the signal, it just dies out, so that your heart is just not constantly having this like excess of electricity within it. Once it reaches the end of the circuit, it just dies out and goes away. But after it goes down from the AV node to the bundle of his and to the Purkinje fibers, the excitation of the Purkinje fibers makes the ventricles contract, and it takes a little bit of time. Obviously, your heart beats very quick, but in like the split millisecond, the atrium contracts first, both of them, and then the ventricles contract. Because if you contract them both at the same time, there's not going to be any place for the blood to go, because you can't contract two things and expect something to go into it if it's getting smaller. So that's why the atrium contracts first, and then like very shortly after, when the electrical signals flow into the ventricles, those contract. Those push the blood out of the ventricles. So it's a circulation that is happening over and over again. Electrical signals are being sent over and over and over again throughout your heart, resulting in the contraction of your atriums and ventricles, resulting in the circulation of your blood and the blood being pumped throughout the rest of your body. So we have a poll 4. After leaving the left ventricle, where does the blood go? I will put that poll up right now. After leaving the left ventricle. Okay, it seems like most of you guys have answered, and yes, well, you guys mostly got it. It is the aorta. And does anybody know where the blood goes after? You can just type this in the chat. Where does the blood go after the right ventricle? After blood leaves the right ventricle, where is it pumped into? Yes, you are correct. The pulmonary trunk. So remember, all the blood goes from the right atrium to your right AV valve to your right ventricle, and from that right ventricle it goes to the pulmonary trunk, and from the pulmonary trunk it goes to your lungs, and then back into your heart into the left side. So then it starts on the left side. Left atrium goes through the left AV valve to the left ventricle, and from the left ventricle it goes into the aorta, where it shoots to the rest of your body. So yes. And second poll, what causes the heart to contract? I will put that up right now. What causes the heart to contract? Nice, most of you guys got it. It is electrical signals from the SA node. Some of you guys put C. The reason why it's not pressure changes from the ventricles is because the pressure change is a result of the contractions. The pressure changes is after the contractions too. So to make the heart contract, is the electrical signals from the SA node, and because of the contractions, there are pressure changes. So that would be as a result. Now, does anyone know why it is not electrical signals from the AV node? If you guys can write that in the chat or just speak out loud. Why is it not because of the AV node that the heart contracts? Yes, very correct. AV node does not start the signals, the SA node does. Without the SA node, the AV node would have no electrical signals to send out. So the initial start of your heart contractions is responsible from the SA nodes. That's where the circuit begins at the very start. Good job. All right, now we can talk a little bit about some of the key features of your respiratory system, what allows you to inhale and exhale all the air. So this is first the pharynx, which is made up of 3 different parts. The pharynx sits behind the nose and mouth, and it connects to the esophagus. So this is like the pathway that goes through down when you're swallowing food. It goes to your esophagus and eventually your stomach. So because of the pharynx, it passes through the pharynx first before getting into your esophagus. And your pharynx is split up into 3 different parts. Your nasal pharynx, which is consisted of pseudostratified endothelium. Remember that pseudostratified means stratified is like layers, and pseudostratified is they look almost stacked on top of each other. They're not on the same like baseline. There can be some on the baseline and then some other cells like on top in another area, so it's more stacked up on top of each other. And stratified squamous are squamous cells, which are very thin, flat cells, which are stacked in a more orderly fashion. You can see that there's one on top of the other instead of pseudostratified, where even though they're stacked, the organization of the stacking is not there compared to a regular stratified. So nasal pharynx, you can remember it's the top one. Nasal nose, your nose is at the top, so your nasal pharynx is the top portion of your pharynx. Oral pharynx, you could think oral like your mouth, orally speaking. It's the one that is behind your mouth. It connects the mouth to the rest of the pharynx. And your laryngeal pharynx is because you could think of it as the most bottom thing, because underneath that is your larynx, which we'll also talk about. So those are ways to identify the differences between the different parts of the pharynx. Nasal pharynx, nose, it's at the top. Oral pharynx behind the mouth, oral mouth, and the laryngeal pharynx is above the larynx, right? More at the bottom of the pharynx, above the larynx, which is right underneath it. So speaking of the larynx, there's the larynx and trachea, which are underneath your pharynx. But your pharynx leads more to your esophagus, which is where the food goes down. Your larynx and trachea is more for like the air, like your voice box is also known as the larynx. Reason is inside the larynx, if you look at it from a top-down view, you have your voice box, which are 2 tissues, smooth muscle tissues that open and close every time you talk, and they vibrate in order to produce your voice and any type of noise. So that's in the larynx. And in the larynx, you also have key features, which we start with your epiglottis. Your epiglottis is this green flap at the top. This is responsible for covering your larynx and your windpipe whenever you're eating food, so that food doesn't go down the wrong hole. So if you guys have ever swallowed food or water and you just immediately like choke and start coughing, is because it goes down the wrong hole. Either you ate too fast or your epiglottis is not covering that hole, so food gets down the wrong hole and then you start coughing it back up. So that's the important responsibility of the epiglottis. There's also your thyroid, erythenoid, cricoid, and corniculus cartilages. All these cartilages, they're there to support the structure and integrity of your larynx. Easy ways to identify them. Here you can see your thyroid cartilage is the biggest one. This maroon color, you can identify it as it's the biggest cartilage that's on your larynx. There is the erythroid cartilages. These are these blue structures. There's two of them, and the way I used to remember it is that they look like pyramids. For I know that thyroid has a Y in it, but RY in erythroid reminds me of pyramid, and these are these triangular shapes that look like almost like the pyramid. So that's how I used to identify that cartilage. And on top of them, they have the corniculus cartilages, which are two of them. At the very top of them, they're a little like points, it looks like. But the way I used to remember this is that they look like horns at the top of the erythroid cartilages. Horn sounds almost similar. So to me, they were the horns on top of the pyramid cartilages. And that's how I identified the differences between them. And lastly, if we know that thyroid is the biggest cartilage, like bigger than all the other ones, like easily, and the erythroid is the pyramid one, the corniculate is the one that looks like horns on top of them, then the last one would be the cricoid cartilage, which is the one underneath them. So going through like when you have to identify images or features, like going through a process of elimination, being like, okay, this is this, so it's not correct, or this is actually this feature. And as you narrow it down, it's easier to identify which feature belongs to which term. So going down underneath the larynx, you have your trachea, which is also known as your windpipe. This is where all the air enters, so that it can go eventually into your lungs and your bronchioles, which we'll also talk about. They consist of C-ring hyaline cartilages on the trachea. All these little red rings that you see are there to support the shape and structure of it, so that your your trachea does not collapse on you. And there's also the carina, which is the separation point between where the trachea ends and your bronchs. They start beginning. Your main right and left bronchi is separated right at the point of the carina. So about your lungs, where the oxygen enters after it passes through your pharynx, your larynx, and your trachea. This is where oxygen and carbon dioxide are exchanged within your lungs. And what causes your breathing is mainly from the contraction and expansion of your diaphragm. So when you take a deep breath, your diaphragm is actually contracting. Your diaphragm sits directly underneath your lungs, so it contracts, it gets smaller in order for there to be more room for your lungs to get bigger when you inhale. So when you exhale and your lungs get smaller because air is leaving, the diaphragm is actually expanding and pushing all that air out of your lungs, out of your body. So it's kind of like the opposite. When the lungs get big, the diaphragm gets small. When the diaphragm gets big, the lungs get small. So it has that relationship between them. And also, breathing is also caused a little bit more from help from your intercostal muscles on the side. It's like the muscles around your ribs and in that area. But that is more activated, like if you're doing high cardiovascular activities that will increase your heart rate and make you breathe harder. That's when those muscles, they come in and help a little bit more. But mostly and mainly, your breathing is caused by the expansion and contraction of your diaphragm. And your lungs, they consist of your bronchi, your bronchioles, and your alveoles, which we will soon talk about later. So on your lungs, you have your right and left lungs. On your left lungs, you have two lobes, the inferior and the superior. And on your right lung, you have three lobes, superior, middle, and inferior. And what separates these lungs are these fissures. If we could take a look at this image. On your left lung, which is on this side right here, you can see that there are two lobes only. The inferior one, which is like a lot smaller, and then this superior lobe, which looks like it takes most of the space. Reason why the left lung only has 2 lobes is because it's a little bit smaller than the right lung. And it's a little bit smaller because, as you can see here, the cardiac impression, that's where your heart sits. So your left lungs needs to create room for your heart to sit right there a little bit on the left side of your body. So your heart is right there in between your lungs in the middle of it, resulting in your left lung having 2 lungs and being a little smaller. For the fissures, you guys can see what separates the inferior lobe from the middle lobe on the right lung and the superior lobe on the left lung is the oblique fissures. You can kind of think of how to identify the difference between the oblique fissures and the horizontal fissure. If you're struggling remembering like which is which, the oblique fissures you can think is a little bit lower on the lungs, so it's more towards your abdomens, and on your abdomens you have these oblique muscles. So you can think of that the oblique fissures is more towards your abdomen, so it's lower on the lungs compared to a horizontal fissure, which is higher, more towards the top and middle part of your right lung. And you can see like the different surfaces on your lung, your costal surface, which means costal refers to all your ribs, your rib cage. So costal muscle, costal surface of the lungs refers to that your ribs are right there, right on the outside of them is where the ribs are surrounding your lungs. Your mediastinal surfaces just means like the middle of your body, in front of your spine. That's where some other organs like your heart would be sitting, right down the middle of your lungs. And then there's the base of the lungs. On your right side, if you can see on this right lung, it has a little indent into it, kind of like how the cardiac impression has its own indent on the side. The reason why the right lung has this indent is because on your right side, that's where your liver sits. Your liver is right underneath that lung right there, causing that indent and like allowing space for the liver to be there. Now we can move more down the bronchial tree, and this is what provides all the oxygen to your lungs. This is where the oxygen travels through before it reaches the end and starts exchanging with your capillaries. So all your bronchi are lined by ciliated pseudostratified columnar epithelium. So these are columnar epitheliums that are stacked on top of each other in a disorganized fashion, which is pseudostratified, but they also ciliated. Ciliated means that they have little hairs on them inside your bronchi. So these little projections from the epithelium are like little hairs, and what they're responsible for is bringing mucus out from your lungs and bronchial tree so that it can go into like your mouth or nose so that you then swallow it or you like blow it out. So if you're like feeling sick and you have like a runny nose, that's from the ciliated pseudostratified columnar cells bringing all that mucus out of your body into like your mouth and your nose for you to either blow it out or swallow. And there are like multiple sections of the bronchial tree. So we start at the main, also primary bronchi. There are 2 of them. There's a secondary lobar bronchi. There's 5 of them. There's also after that there's a segmental, which is also known as a tertiary bronchi. There's 10 in the right one, 8 in the left lung. And then after that it goes into your bronchioles. So similar like how we talked about arteries and arterioles or veins and venules, bronchs have this, they have their own thing too called bronchioles, which are essentially smaller bronchi. So after they reach a certain like size, once they become really small, they start being called as bronchioles instead. So from the bronchioles, you also have a next section, which is the terminal bronchioles, the respiratory bronchioles, until it finally reaches your alveoles, which consists of all the ducts, the alveoli ducts and the sacs, which is where the capillary bed sits on, and that's where all the oxygen and carbon dioxide is exchanged. So about the alveoles, it's very important to know what's in it because this is what is responsible for your breathing and your exchange between the gases. They're the squamous type 1 alveolar cells, which make up about 95% of the surface area. And this is on these cells is where gas exchange between alveoli and blood happens. And they're squamous, meaning they're like flat and really thin, just one layer of cells between between them and like the capillaries. And this thin layer needs to be thin in order to allow proper transfer between the blood and the gases. If there's too many layers, then you won't easily transfer the blood and gases between the alveoli and the capillaries. There are also the great type 2 alveolar cells, which only take up about 5% of the surface area. But one important thing that they do is that they create or synthesize and secrete or like send out a surfactant, which is used to lower the tension within your lungs. Because if you have too much tension on the surface area, then the exchange, in your alveoli, the exchange won't be as easy. So because of this surfactant, it lowers the tension on the surface and it allows for easy exchange between your alveoli and blood. There are also alveolar macrophages. Macrophages are just another type of cell that is out there to phagocytize foreign substances or like dust cells. So anything that should not be in your lungs, these alveolar macrophages are responsible for going after them, consuming them into their body, and then destroying them. That's their process of eliminating toxins. They consume them and they destroy them, and that is a process called to phagocytize the bacteria. So within the lungs, you have the two different zones, kind of like how you have the two different circuits in the heart. You have the two different zones within the lungs. The conducting zone is from your mouth to the terminal bronchioles. This is responsible to warm and humidify the air as it comes in and into your lungs, and it also filters and cleans the air, which is also part of all the ciliated lining on your bronchs. Those help also filter and clean the air as it comes down to the rest of your lungs. And for the respiratory zone, there's from the respiratory bronchioles to the alveolar sacs. So the respiratory zone is like the specific region where gas exchange occurs. This is very towards the end of the of like the path from the bronchs to the alveoli. So it's a very smaller part of just the respiratory bronchioles and alveoli where the gas exchange is occurring. So from this image, can anybody tell me what this structure is? This long tube with that's on the left side, right above, or right underneath your larynx. But you guys can type into the chat if you yes, that is correct. That is your trachea. Very good. Now after your trachea, you guys remember that it splits at the carina, this middle point right here. It splits into what are the name of the two these two structures that it splits into? Yes, correct. Good. Your main bronchi. Very good. So now after the air passes the main bronchi, what is the next feature, next structure after the main bronchis? Yes, the lobar bronchi, or also you can also the secondary bronchi. Just either one would work. That's correct. So after the lobar bronchi, yes, you wrote it, is a segmental bronchi or the tertiary bronchi. So it is it falls down from the air travels past the main bronchi to the lobar bronchi to the segmental bronchi, and after the segmental bronchi, it reaches to this right side, this right image, which is basically it's much more zoomed in because all of these structures are very, very small. So as it gets smaller and it passes through the segmental bronchi, does anyone know what is after the segmental bronchi? What is next on the path of air? Yes, good. Your bronchioles. And you have many millions of these all over your lungs. So after the bronchioles, this is essentially a small bronchi. That's what bronchioles mean. So after the bronchioles, does anybody know which type of bronchiole is after it? Ooh, no, it is the terminal bronchi. Yes. So the terminal bronchi is the next feature after it. And yes, you wrote respiratory. Respiratory is afterwards. So going back to the zones that we talked about, the terminal bronchi is where the conducting zone ends. So the conducting zone is all the way from your mouth to your terminal bronchi. So it consists of all these, the trachea, the lobar bronchi, main bronchi, segmental bronchi, your bronchioles, all the way to the terminal bronchi. So it consists of most of the features that your air passes through. And then your respiratory zone is just this respiratory bronchiole and the alveoli that are right here. So they have your alveolus, which is the singular version of one of these little sacs that you see, these little like grape-like things. Alveoli is the plural version, but alveolus is the singular version. And they have the alveolar sacs, which is just a group of alveoli like all together. And does anybody know what is on top of it? What is lying on top of the alveolar sacs right here? Yes, that is the capillary network and bed. These are your capillaries, and leading up to them are your pulmonary arterioles. Remember, arterioles are like the small arteries, so they lead up to the capillaries. And after the blood exits the capillaries, after it has exchanged between the oxygen and carbon dioxide, it becomes the pulmonary venules. The venules are the small veins that will eventually lead to the veins and the rest. All right, last question. Which pulmonary zone is a segmental bronchi located in? Let me put that poll up right now. Which pulmonary zone is a segmental bronchi located in? So yes, most of you guys got it correct. It is the conducting zone. If we remember, the segmental bronchi is right before the bronchioles, and it's still part of the conducting zone. The conducting zone doesn't start until the respiratory bronchioles, right down here, and it just consists of the respiratory bronchioles and the alveoles. So that's just the end of the respiratory zone. So now a summary of what we have covered. We have talked about the blood, what it consists of. It consists of plasma, erythrocytes, the Buffy coats, which is the white blood cells, and the platelets. We talked about the different blood types and why it's important to in blood transfusions to give someone the proper blood type in order to not have coagulation and blood clots. We talked about the vessels, the different types of vessels, their arteries, veins, capillaries, the layers, and the responsibility for the capillaries to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. And we talked about the heart, how the blood circulation goes through the heart, through each of the valves and the ventricles and the atrium. Talked about the conducting system, the conduction system, which is sends out electrical signals that will pump and contract the heart in order for the blood to pump the heart to pump the blood out to the rest of the body. The respiratory, which consists of pharynx, larynx, and trachea. Those are three important structures. And then finally, your lungs and bronchial trees and the different sections within them and how they air eventually goes through them and into your alveoli for you to exchange oxygen. So some study tips I have is for your lectures, I would definitely recommend that you guys use flashcards. Lecture tests are all like words. They're not images. Images are for the lab. So for your lectures, what helped me a lot was using flashcards and putting like the terms and the definitions or functions on the back of it and going over those over and over for your lecture exams. And for your lab exams, it's really focused on the image part of it because all the images aren't at lab exams. And a good resource that I have is a website called Purpose Games, which is essentially a matching game of any like organ, anything you can think of. It will be on the game, and you can practice over and over again, identifying certain features from the images in order to prepare yourself for the lab exams. And also, when you are studying for this next test, plan out your study days. Plan out, okay, today I'm doing these chapters, tomorrow I'll do these chapters, and the next day I'll do like the last chapters. And that will help you not overload yourself, because if you're studying all at once, it can seem almost impossible. Like you just have too many things to study. So section it out and go day by day, and then at the end you'll like be able to retain everything without feeling overwhelmed. So does anybody have any questions as we are going to wrap up? No questions. All right. These are links. Remember, there will be I will send out a survey link at the end where you guys answer a feedback survey. And because you answer that feedback survey, I will provide you with the presentation, this presentation slides, these links to different places that you can study. You will also get answer sheets for the questions that we had today. So this all intended if you just respond to the feedback link, and then we'll send you, I will send you all the resources that I've provided here today. And finally, we have the lab, the final workshop exam, which will be on Tuesday, May 18th from 4:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. I will be doing this with my peer tutor partner, Stacy. She also peer tutors for anatomy. We'll be doing this together, so feel free to come by, and we'll be covering over the topics for you guys to prepare for your final exam. It will be in a little over a week, so remember that it's there, and you guys are all welcome to join, and we can study a little bit more. Here again are our tutoring hours for myself and for Stacy. She is from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. on Mondays. I'm from, and also on Wednesdays from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. For me, my hours are Mondays 9:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. and 2 p.m. to 3 p.m. as well as Thursdays 9:30 to 12:30 a.m. So of course, thank you guys all for coming.